Armorican Dreams. A dark mythic fantasy story for moss, stone and steel. Written by Ramsey McGregor. An original by Fantasy Bound. Chapter 1. Winds swept hard upon an autumn night across the coast of Dunberlin, a poor province to the far west of the kingdom of Coromant, lorded by a baron further inland. A baron that people along the coast only knew by name, for seldom did such highborn bring themselves to the cold fringes of Dunberlin to look upon the hardy folk who lived there. Forsooth, the people in this part of the grey-skied, green-shrouded land were an isolated folk. So long as they were left with their peace to fish and forest, and paid tribute to their liege, and did not dare disturb the king's peace, then they would be left alone, free of trouble. But trouble had been brewing across the kingdom. Even in these coastal fringes did travelling bards and peddlers come gaunt and weary-faced with news from across the realm. A rebellion had grown somewhere in the deep south, where old Camelon once existed, before the reigning kingdom of Coromant had destroyed them, and like a festering plague it had spread north. At first, the communal fishermen and sailors dismissed these ghastly tales as an excuse for travellers to garner sympathy with the womenfolk or lighten the men's purses, using woeful tales to excuse the high prices of their trade. But verily, did the hushed rumours become a loud truth. Soldiers, never more than 5 for these parts of Dunberlin, had come thither from the castles to patrol the hitherto wild, empty roads. The people of the coastal villages had become increasingly agitated at the growing news, such as the village of Harpestein, a settlement not really different to the other 4 that lined the coast. But on a grey-blue foggy dawn, 7 nights ago did 2 score of armoured men come hither, their commander demanding ships to sail covertly to the land across the sea, Armorica. A group of sailors, the strongest and fiercest of them, were chosen from the village to accompany the soldiers and ensure safe passage to Armorica, whither they would investigate the rumours of rebel activity. Terrified by the revelation that a land only a day's sail away would harbour such savage brigands stirred the locals of Harpestein, and verily did nearly all experienced sailors volunteer to accompany the soldiers to root out the insurrectionists. A day to the Armorican sea village of Saltmarsh and back, but 7 days hence, and the men, sailor nor soldier, had not returned. With few sailors left in Harpestein, save boys and the elderly, who remained to fish for their families, Harpestein were deciding what must be done. Fiona came to the village tavern, where all folk of Harpestein convened, not to solely drink, but to converse and relax amid a lyre's tune or a story feigned or true. Fiona walked with a pensive poise as she entered the tavern upon that windy autumn night. The sky a clear array of innumerable stars, the faint green rings to the far north, crossing the starry sky like a full bow. Fiona, being a traditional Greenwichian like most of the folk of coastal Dunberlin, would have marvelled at the sight of such beauty, as she had always done since she were a child. But since each night had passed lately, her mind had been obfuscated from spirituality and wondrous fantasy, and instead she had grown morose and troubled. This was unusual for Fiona, but not unexpected. She was 19 years old and rather lately wed, for in these parts folk married young to survive. Fiona was a comely woman, of long, fair, curly hair, that she kept veiled in the Greenwichian fashion, and fairer skin. She had delicate, albeit simple features befitting a peasant class, and dark green eyes. But alas, this night, like the past few nights, her brow was furrowed with trepidations that only dimmed slightly as she entered the tavern, into the warmth of candlelight and the presence of familiar village folk. It smelled of roasted fish, cordial and stews that thankfully blotted out the slightest odour of sweat from the remaining men who had been laboriously working that day. There was a newcomer in the village who had grabbed the attention of most of the patrons in the tavern. Judging by the garish clothes, though tarnished from the elements, and by his lute upon his back, he was a minstrel. But no song or joviality came from he. Nay, the bard spoke with a warning voice, speaking to the village of Harpestein huddled within that tavern about what news there was.
It is no longer a border skirmish that the king's men brave. It is total war.
You speak truly, minstrel,
spoke an elderly fisherman, his voice blended with incredulity and worry.
I know it to be truth, for I have seen it. I know not why your liege has not been forthcoming to his subjects about the state of the kingdom. But alas, let me be your herald, good men and women of Harpestein. The kingdom is at war.
No gasps of surprise came from the tavern. Instead, only murmurs of somberness sounded. The minstrel continued.
The rebels have amassed a mighty army, traitors and bandits. According to the druids at Dunberlin Castle, the army has shattered the holds of Frostmarch and sacked Dragon's End.
Dragon's End? Exclaimed one of the patrons. But that's in Drake's Path.
That's just south of here,
said another. A stir of panicked voices subtly buzzed across the room, but were quieted with a hand from Connell, the alderman of the village.
Tell us, young Dougal,
he said calmly.
Is Dunberlin ready?
The minstrel, Dougal, was silent and looked around the room before speaking.
The whole kingdom is under serious threat, my lord alderman. I have seen the devastation upon the settlements of Dragon's End. The men lie butchered with dogs and horses. The children, some dead. Some I believe have been taken by these cursed to become soldiers.
Just as they did in the Winter War, God and gods, remarked a grizzled patron. The bard continued, but with a falter.
The women, forgive me ladies of the tavern, for I must speak plainly, hang naked from the battlements of castles. I ventured through the remains of Monarch, where I escorted a young woman, much fair as you.
Dougal pointed first with a nod of his head and then a hand toward Fiona, who during this time was still at the back of the huddled assembly. She blinked in surprise and felt a little exposed as eyes turned on her as they followed the minstrel's gaze.
Aye, lass, as fair as you, but scarred, branded, beaten and, forgive my words, raped, left with an affliction where she screams in her sleep. I escorted her to Dunberlin Castle. She is in the care of the druids now.
The tavern was ghostly quiet, and Fiona had grown ghostly pale. Oft did bards have a way with words, but this man did not trill his adventure. His face was grave and haunted.
She is not the first I have seen, nor will she be the last, I wager,
he commented, before he turned back to the alderman.
You asked if Dunberlin is ready. The truth is, I do not know. But it's closer than you think, and if they can sack walled towns in Dragon's End and smash the holds of Frostmarch, ever marching northward, then it would be wise to be prepared. Forsooth, 3 nights ago I saw smoke rising from the forest by Redslap Vale, but I dared not venture closer for fear of rebels, goblins, or otherwise.
The tavern rose with voices in concern, stirred with fright from the minstrel's tale. He held out his arms.
I do not know, people of Harpestein, and to be frank, I do not believe it would be rebels, not a band of them, less so an army. Or the Baron would be out with his men facing them if they were so close, surely.
But how do you know it's not them?
Aye, even a small bunch of the bastards. We don't have the men.
What about the other coastal villages, like Belrick and Pontycrook?
Bah, them lot I wouldn't trust to pass me a flagon of cordial without spitting in it. Not less them heathens in Pontycrook, taking up with them druids now they won't help us godly folk.
Why hasn't the Baron sent our soldiers to stay this time? We're exposed.
They come here. Aye, they will.
Enough, please.
Implored the alderman emphatically.
We cannot begin to make illusory conclusions. However, what we must do is be ready. I will speak with the priest tomorrow, God willing, and make preparations. For the village, for us.
The tavern continued to ebb between discussions and arguments about Harperstain's defence against the rebels. But after several minutes of speaking with the other women in the tavern and seeing very little conversation besides the impending doom, Fiona decided to head home, but not before she caught up with her friend, Maeve. Like Fiona, she was of similar age, but pregnant with her 4th child. After a brief conversation of the current problem, Maeve changed the conversation.
You see Duncan in there?
What about Duncan?
Fiona said with a sliver of irritation.
Couldn't take his eyes off you in there. Heard him speaking to old Evie about you.
Oh, that lecherous snake. I've refused him twice, in Westlandic and Cornish. Is that a whoremaster of a thing wet behind the ears?
Fiona looked out to the coast upon the shimmering sea.
I'm a married woman, and he will respect that. When Fingal comes back from Saltmarsh, he'll teach that heathen a lesson and throw him back to Belrig.
Maeve was awkwardly silent for a moment.
Fiona, it's been 7 days. Saltmarsh is only a day's sail away.
And?
Maeve did not speak, but her eyes betrayed her thoughts. Thoughts that Fiona found unbelievable.
We should have sailed there to see what's going on 3 nights ago at least.
With what? Fishing boats? These buckets can float along the coast for fishing, but not cross the sea. Not without a good sailor and a player for calm waters. And all our best sailors, along with our best boats, are over in Armorica.
Fiona remained silent while Maeve stood with her, unsure what to say. But after a moment, Fiona continued, her voice softer but resolute.
We need our men back. I need my Fingal back, or we will be slaughtered by these rebels.
She paused with tremulous lips, recalling the vile description of Dragon's End's fate.
Or worse. And I won't feel safe until he is back.
I know, it's been a hard new world to come to terms with. That's why me and some of the other women are leaving to Dunberlin Castle.
Fiona spun her head around to face Maeve with a surprised look.
What?
Maeve nodded and gripped Fiona's hand softly with both of hers.
Connell and the priest have been sending letters to the other villages, to send the women and children to Dunberlin Castle from the coasts, to seek safety behind the Baron's walls. I'm with 3 bairns and 1 in the way. My man is somewhere with yours in Saltmarsh, and though I pray for his return, I cannot stay here. And neither should you, sister. Come with us. It's a 3-day journey, but I've heard the convoy will be protected and provisioned.
Dunberlin Castle?
Muttered Fiona, her brow furrowed.
Aye, we'll be safe there, and it'll be good behind those walls. You loved the castle when we used to go with our lads. You were so oft at the Terran Market Square, I wondered if you shouldn't just open a stall yourself.
Tomorrow, you say?
Aye, it'll be here by noon from Belrig.
Fiona was silent as she looked at Maeve, to which Maeve blinked and asked,
You'll come?
Fiona smiled kindly.
It's a lot to take in. I'll think about it tonight.
Maeve, sensing Fiona's hesitance, spoke earnestly.
It's a woeful time we live in. Just as our mams and pas lived through the last war, we'll need to be as strong as them. If your Fingal and my Cathal come home, they'll find us.
Fiona smiled sweetly back and said,
Good night, Maeve.
And with good parting the 2 women left back to their homes. Maeve would return home to find her 3 children, her little brother and her mother. Her home on the outer fringes of the village, further inland, was a small cottage like most of everyone's in Harperstein, and would be a hubbub of familial noise. Fiona did not need to walk far from the tavern to reach her own home, which stood only a rowboat's length away, facing the Armorican Sea. It was slightly bigger than the others, though nonetheless still held the same look, stone-walled and wooden-roofed, laden with hay from the farms to keep the heat in, for even in the short grey summers these lands were cold and fraught with rain and hail. As she entered, she felt the silence first, as always. Aye, it was warm enough. She'd got a small fire going in the centre of the hut, where atop it hung a small cauldron around a crucible. A fish and mushroom stew had been slowly boiling, and by now was ready to eat. But Fiona had no appetite. Her mind hungered instead for ruminations. Unlike Maeve, Fiona didn't have anyone. Her ma had told her that her pa had died before she was born, during the end days of the Winter War, when the now extinguished Southern Kingdom deigned to conquer the lands of Coromant. Fiona was not alone in the world. Not entirely. She had an older sister and 3 older brothers, 3 half-brothers and 2 half-sisters. Her ma had remarried a merchant from Dunberlin Castle, and they had moved south for warmer days, along with her half-siblings. Her older brothers were all married and scattered across Dunberlin, living their own lives. Her sister Kira was also close by, but they had never really got on. Kira was obsessed with marrying a knight, and oft she had journeyed to tourneys to bat her eyelids and flaunt her simple beauty before a squire or errant. Kira had dreams of being a lady, and was not fond of being reminded of her serf-like origins as a fisher's girl from the edge of nowhere. Alas, Fiona had been content in Harperstein, for she had found herself enamoured with Fingal, a local lad whom she had grown up with, and just as she had flowered into a pretty lass, he had grown into a strong boar of a lad. And indeed was Fingal strong, serious, and carried a tender emotion that he showed only her. He made her feel special, and she made him feel likewise. Long dark brown hair and a thick drooping moustache, his ruddy strong face, broad frame, and powerful arms made him a strapping young lad to make many a maiden swoon for him. But he had promised himself unwaveringly to Fiona, and for several weeks since their marriage life had been bliss. He was a skilled sailor, and oft did he do trade with the villages along the coasts of Dunberlin and, to a lesser extent, Armorica. The latter was a land that had an ill reputation for superstitious, strange people that birthed fairy tales to spook children on the mainland. But Fingal, like most of the other sailors of Harperstein, were always the voice of reason. "There are no shades or fiends that haunt the Armoricans. Just a devil's greed when it comes to haggling Cornish wool." Fiona smiled at the thought of him, while she began to sup from her stew by the fire. On their first days of marriage, Fingal had been quick to expand Fiona's home into the size it was now, for together they dreamed of having many children. They had even discussed names and the likeness of them, even though Fiona was not pregnant. Though her mind dove through mirthful memories, her demeanour in her hut was a troubled one. What if he was stranded there, in Saltmarsh? What if there had been a disaster at sea? What of this? What of that? What if he were to return tomorrow and find his Fiona gone? Her thoughts then delved into anger. Anger towards the village. Yes, now the men had gone over the sea. The village was mostly old and very young, and a small cluster of men who had reasons for not going, like Duncan the merchant, or the whoremaster, Fingal had called him. Duncan was a wealthy merchant who delivered and sold wools on behalf of peasant farmers, but was known for having a weakness for the women of the night when he visited Dunberlin Castle. More to it, he was a pagan convert, now worshipping the Mother. And he had been salivating for Fiona ever since the sailors hadn't returned by the 3rd night. The man thought that money could buy her. Fiona let out an audible sound of disgust, just thinking about that wiry, pallid-faced, crow-nosed man, and went to think about Fingal once more, but instead found herself thinking about the future, which was marred by dark thoughts of the impending invasion. Being in Harperstein meant that news came slow and with gossip. But this war was no bard's story, and the sincere minstrel who had been too shaken about what he'd seen yonder south had in turn shaken her, especially when he pointed her out in his account of the brutalized women. There were too many stories following the minstrels about what the rebels were doing. The villages were riled up, old and young. The castles were falling to these savages. Nowhere was safe, even Dunberlin Castle as Maeve had promised. And the smokes at Red Slap? Fiona's mind was spiraling into a paranoid flux. Losing her appetite to the fear, she quickly got up to the door and stood by it, drinking in the sudden icy fresh air of the sea, and listening to the wafting ocean waves. Peace washed over her, and she felt calm once more. This was the third night she had begun to fall into these damning thoughts, where devils puppeteer dark premonitions before her. She repeated a prayer to the Creator to calm her, and verily her mind felt at ease once more. She sat there that night, just outside her home, looking out to sea. Her thoughts were no longer what-ifs, but what she would do. Would she follow Maeve and her company to Dunberlin Castle? Would she stay here? Maybe Fingal will return, and she was just being a silly mare to think so poorly of her man, or... I will find him, Fiona said to herself. The thought of it, mad as it must be, had slowly been forming in the undercurrent of her ruminations. Armorica was only a day's sail away. The night was calm, and the waters calmer still, almost inviting. She knew how to row a boat, and had seen it done since she opened her eyes. The folk of the village were too scared, but Fiona knew that if the roles were reversed, Fingal would swim across the sea to find her. Moreover, Fiona knew where Saltmarsh was. Well, generally. It was apparently directly northwest from Harperstein, and again the waters this night were quiet, with no cloud in the sky, only the silvery moon and the northern green rings above. Her mind at once became as focused as a sailor. It felt good to feel proactive in the face of so much uncertainty for a change. Quickly, she took some spare clothing, heavy wools, cotton and hide, then some provisions. The stew would not be durable, but she bagged some bread, buns, vegetables, and dried salted fish she had stored away. She took also a water skin filled with water that she'd bought from a travelling water seller a day back. What if there were dangers, however? Fiona bridled at the thought, but then quickly steeled herself, her courage renewed. She took a dagger and equipped herself with a short bow and a quiver of arrows. All women in Coromand were trained in archery, not for combat necessarily, but as sport and hunting for food. This was a skill that became especially prevalent during the Winter War, when readily available food and fighting men became scarce, and had since remained a pivotal custom. She herself had enjoyed hunting rabbits and deer in her early pubescent years. She had been lucky not to run into elves or kobolds like some of the other villagers, who had brought such forest folk back as kill trophies. Fiona felt slightly foolish and proud at the same time. She felt like she was going to war. If she found Fingal, or even arrived at Saltmarsh, would they laugh at her? I don't care, Fiona swiftly thought. I'm going to find Fingal. Maybe I'll find them all. Maybe I'll be a hero, a warrior queen like the ones mentioned in the Green Holy Book. In her mind, it was not entirely a humorous idea. Fiona was serious. For 7 nights, drawing into the 8th, had she felt nothing but nervousness, confiding with the other women and trusting others when she didn't even trust herself. Lastly, after donning her cloak, a liver blue drapery with a brooch in the shape of a crescent moon that Fingal had had smithed and jewelled for her before their wedding, she lastly took her Greenwichian amulet, a wooden trinket hewn in the shape of a tree, symbolic of the Greenwichian faith. Such an amulet was said to have power to rebuke the charms of evil spirits and garner protection from the 12 prophets and the saints of old. Apparently, a copy of the Green Book could offer even more power to the carrier, but that was tucked away in the village temple. Besides, only the priests could read it, unlike Fiona, who, like the rest of the village, if not the entire country, couldn't read at all. Fiona, well and truly packed and armed, stepped out from her hut once again, with a little less confidence than before. What was once a formulation of foolhardy thoughts was now halfway to reality. She was really going to do this. The village was silent and completely dark. Even the tavern, which was usually the last house to dim, was lost in the night. The only light left came from the stars above and the full moon. Even the rings above to the far, far north offered little illumination, just presence. That was enough for Fiona. The lunar light welcomed her to the sight of a cluster of small fishing boats anchored or tied to the wooden quay and boardwalks further along the village. Fiona whispered a quick prayer to God, pulled her hood up, and began her walk to the quay. Chapter 2. It was morning when Fiona, completely exhausted, finally let go of the oars and unfurled the sail to let the wind carry her onward. Her hands were red, calloused and showing the signs of skin torn from the rowing. Her arms ached and she dug into her bag to pull out some dried fish to eat. The rush of stealing, or borrowing, she had told herself, the boat, as well as the rush of adventure, had been excellent motivation to sail her away from Harperstane. The thrill of her nocturnal campaign and the feeling of freedom she felt out at sea had been sufficient to maintain her energy through the night. And by dawn, when Harperstane became naught but a thin line along the horizon, she felt the sudden loneliness upon the calm grey waters. The sound of the wafting waves was certainly calming, and she thanked the merciful God above for it, for such kind seas were uncommon. She felt the direction of the winds blow her loose curly hair westward. She knew Saltmarsh was northwest, but if she was going west, she was sure it'd be a walk from where she'd land to venture onward by foot. Indeed, at least I would be on land, she thought dreamily. Though liberating it was to be free out at sea, it had grown rather quickly to become a lonesome experience. As morning waned and the sky greys cleared a pale blue sky, Fiona ate a lunch in silence before singing to herself, at first Greenwichian hymns, but then into tavern ditties to lighten her mood. By noon she realized she was getting very tired. She hadn't slept for a day and a bit. Alone at sea, she slowly realized the danger. What if there were sirens and kelpies swimming beneath, waiting for her to sleep, or luring her to enchanted slumber before snatching her into their watery world? Or pirates, seafaring rebels. Oh. To distract herself, Fiona began to row again, but without the rush of excitement and adventure, and she did not row for long. Instead, as the afternoon blossomed into a calm blue sky that promised calm waters but no warmth, and seeing as Armorica could still not be seen, Fiona's eyes drooped and her breathing became one with the ocean, and she fell into a gentle slumber. Chapter 3. If only her dreams were as gentle. Much of her dreams were as lost and fast as they were conjured, just a blur of altered experiences. But after a messy myriad came forth a vivid sight, like nothing she'd ever dreamt of before. And the way it pulled her dreams from forgetful bliss, it felt invasive. She was on her little boat, and it was night. the waters very calm. And yet she felt unnerved. The more she lingered, the more she realized what it was that made her dream self feel a sudden soulful dread. For indeed it was night, quiet, cloudless, an open sky, but starless, moonless, ringless, a black sheet. Yet the waters reflected a dark orange light, and the waters themselves were a calm dead. No waves wafted, not even a ripple. Just her, on a boat before an empty void. She could not bring herself to gaze long at the black curtain above the water. There was an invisible yet omnipotent pressure that made her scared. It felt as though a cosmic phenomenon, alive and unknown, was looking back at her from beyond. The rising feeling of fear from glowering, threatening eyes, though invisible, suffused her with dread. She did not want to be here anymore. She wanted this dream to end, and yet it would not. She looked around, but as she glanced at the waters to peer beneath it, she found that she couldn't. This whole plain scared her. The feeling of an unknown alien land, and even more, an unknown entity of ethereal alien grandeur, made her feel exposed. All of a sudden, this living void of warped existence shook violently, but without a sound, and Fiona, spooked, felt herself curl into a ball, terrified. Then all-consuming black. And then, the sound of someone talking. Nothing coherent, just words, sounds, fading away to a distant chorus. Fiona fluttered her green eyes open and pulled the hair from her face to the dying light of an evening sky, an array of oranges casting pink and blue clouds, as she sat up from her slumber, feeling very thirsty and parched. She glanced around to take in her surroundings. A muddy, swampy mere amid small stalagmites, surrounded by pine forest that promised steep, wild dells. An environment she had never seen along the coast of Dunberlin. She was in Armorica. She was certain of it. And as she'd expected, she had landed away off from Saltmarsh. Brushing the dark, disturbing dream eagerly away, she stood up with a tired, driven wobble. Fiona grabbed the oars to swim the boat out of the mere, but found she couldn't. The oars were stuck in the mere's mud. She went to yank one of them with both hands, but after several attempts she found it futile, and her energy completely depleted. Alas, she got up from the boat, and realizing the mere was treacherously soft like quicksand, she gingerly hopscotched the smoothest protruding rocks until her feet eventually landed upon the leafy bramble and soft earth of the forest, keeping herself on its fringes, for the forest was of pine and little light showed within. The darkness promised by the pine forest made her swallow with a growing regret. Chapter 4. Night fell slowly, with a starry sky blotted with clouds that passed across the moon high above. The icy air and cold, strong winds kept Fiona pertinent in her trek north, where she hoped she'd find Saltmarsh, or at least a trail, a sign, anything that would lead her towards civilization. Currently she was feeling slightly foolish and tired as she trekked between forest and coast, keeping her sight away from facing the woods, for the oppressive blackness that stared back made her mind conjure even the most banal of fairy tales into a frightfully real possibility, waiting to snatch her. So instead, she spoke to herself, recounting past conversations and scripting future ones also. Sometimes she sang prayers and ditties to enchant herself into a finer mood, but even those fell silent as her feet began hurting. Like most people on the coast, if not all rural Coromant, People like Fiona wore fur boots, wooden clogs, or simply went about bare. Only well-to-do folk, like highborn, could afford the good shoes like leather or linen. Clogs would certainly ache, and barefoot was an option if her fur boots got drenched with water. But no soul could ease the gradual pain of this never-ending trek. Fiona was tired and already feeling slightly defeated. She slowed and slung her backpack from her shoulders to take out some bread buns and her water skin. Fiona spoke a quick but meaningful prayer to the Creator and the 12 before supping. Before she could take a bite, she froze and eyed the forest with wide-eyed suspicion. A sudden fright came over her. She fled a few feet from the forest and crouched by a small ledge facing the coast behind her, already feeling hunted and small. She had seen something in the darkness of the forest, a flicker of something, a light that had danced before her periphery. Fiona let out a shaky breath, and her mind raced with ideas. But after a swelling silence, she gingerly peeped her head up. There it was again, a flicker of a swinging glow that was amber and bright before it vanished once more. A lantern? A bullseye lantern from what Fiona could fathom by the way it moved. Thrice more it came back, and this time it did not dim. Instead, it grew brighter. It came closer, and Fiona shrank with crippling suspense. Perhaps a woodsman? Maybe a patrol? Or maybe pirates, rebels, or a simple madman. Eventually, out from the woods came the bearer of the lantern, accompanied by 2 others illuminated by the moonlight. All 3 were diminutive, squat-bodied, flat-faced, darkly skinned, and thickly bearded. They were hooded and drab in tattered rags. Fiona held her breath from sudden realization. Dwegar. She had heard of such creatures many times, but never seen them. Devious dwarfs from the deep, who forever sought to lure people out into their dark, secret world, for what purpose she never wanted to know. As soon as she'd seen their features revealed by the dim lunar light, she had rashly ducked her bonny head and placed her back to the ledge, her body rigid with fear, and the sudden realization of her folly venturing into Armorica alone. She dared not breathe. Had the Dwegar noticed her? Oh, God and prophets above, she thought. I might die. The waves a few feet before her were noisy and violent, and yet she could hear their footsteps breaking twigs and bramble, stepping closer, dangerously closer. Fiona's eyes nearly popped out from the speed of her heart racing, before she made a sudden and instinctive decision. She leapt from her hiding spot and backed away from the ledge, facing the forest, where the 3 dwarf men stood. They didn't look surprised. Despite their surreal appearance, Fiona could see they had a dangerous look in their dark brass eyes, like starving dogs finding a bone with a sliver of meat. Fiona was quick to take her bow, nock and draw an arrow, aiming it at the 3 dwarfs.
Stay back! Get away from me!
She shouted, backing away.
Fiskir manditar volaika metwegar karagan.
What?
Fiona exclaimed, before drawing tighter upon the string of her bow.
Onarelgi, Honskane
And the other 2 chuckled mirthlessly, grinning darkly with wolfish delight. They were moving now with caution, slowly towards her, already by the edge of the ledge. They were illuminated by the moon glow, giving her perfect sight of all 3 of them, lantern aside. Fear overrode all else, and with a prey's foolhardy wit, she loosed her arrow at the middle Dwegar. The arrow struck true and fast, too fast for the Dwegar to react. It shot right through the right eye of the middle dwarf, dropping the lantern, grabbing his face, and screaming in pain as black blood trickled madly from his punctured eye socket. The 2 other Dwegar bridled and wavered momentarily but Fiona quickly knocked another arrow and sidestepped away from the Dwegar, who were not as confident as they were before. They did not move. They just glared malevolently at her as they grabbed their injured partner, the latter pointing where Fiona had once been, his tongue becoming slurred and his voice breaking as he bent over, more blood gushing from his face. The other two started to move toward her, but instead Fiona growled and shouted back at them, aiming her bow shakily. They stopped moving, even as Fiona backed herself into the forest, and instantly went into a darting sprint further in, trying hard to conceal herself from these vagrant creatures as far and as quickly as possible. She ran ever further and deeper into the pine wood with complete abandon. She let her legs fly into the dark until it became a rhythm of speed and breath. Until she tripped. A fallen branch, long and firm enough to cause her balance to dither, and after a wobbly attempt to rebalance herself, her coordination fell apart, and she in turn tumbled like a ragdoll down a sloping dell amid dry-leaved bramble and earth. When she had landed at the base of the dell, where she could hear a small stream trickling by, she let out a scream of pain as a sudden shot of agony blasted from her right ankle. Unable to stifle the immensity of the pain, she gritted her teeth. Growling her anguish away, she dumped her hide boots off to look at her ankle. No immediate injury, she was thankful. She was no cleric, but she surmised that it was sprained pretty badly. She slid herself closer to the stream and gently placed her injured foot within, the cool water soothing at first, leaving the pain to be a pulsing, moody thrum. Despite the immediate danger withering away from her heart, she felt no peace, for the forest was black, black as a dreamless sleep, and quiet. Once more her mind began to imagine what could be around her. But she thought back to the fight. Did I do something wrong? She thought to herself. She had killed deer and pheasants many times before, and had never felt remorse, for that was a manner of survival, to eat. But then again, this Dwegar, he or it, had threatened her. She could not understand it, but it didn't need to speak to reveal its intentions. The eyes of all three of them, evil, drag her away into the deep bowels of dark earth to never see the light of day again. The idea of being denied the holy gift of God's light, to have her back bent and lashed and toil away for the rest of her life, terrified her. Before a strange thought quickly consoled it.
I should have killed you all,
she suddenly said out loud. What? She thought to herself. Such an unnatural thing for her to think, let alone say. But when it came from her lips like a fleeting arrow, it had felt cathartic, pleasurable, like a moment of release. And yet, the more she thought on it, this aberrant moment, the more it made sense to her. They were bad creatures. They weren't even human, so what did it matter? They would not tarnish her soul to reach the heavens. God knows what's in the heart of us all, she thought, and I merely defended myself from creatures of the deep and hells. Her mind eased, but she did not sleep. Instead, Fiona rested her eyes lightly and found herself travelling amid thoughts of gloom and darkness. She felt sudden rushes of anger and a growing urge to return to the coast and hunt those dwarfs. Hunt them, hurt them, kill them, mangle them. She envisioned the Dwegar she shot in the eye, dragging it into the woods, into a little hole she'd make for herself, and committing unspeakable acts of gore upon it. The idea of the suffering was orgasmic. As the horrifically pleasurable thoughts became too cursed to endure for her humanity, Fiona suddenly opened her eyes, looking about. The sky was lightening to a dark grey blue. Dawn had come at last. Chapter 5. Her sleepless rest came at a groaning end when the dawn sky above yawned ever lighter. A blue-grey hue began to illuminate the lightless forest in a dim shadowscape of silhouetted trees, a dell laden with moss-daubed rocks, wild grasses, nettles and shrubs, and the slow-flowing stream that was still a black mirror before Fiona. She slowly moved her sprained ankle and stifled a wince. The pain was not as sharp, but still thrummed with a dull throb. She felt her fur boots, damp but not soaked. Donning the footwear, she drunkenly limped to the stream and washed her face. The water was ice-cold and just what she needed to wake up. The dark, depraved thoughts she had flitted through the night became shameful fantasies she disposed of by concentrating on the immediate problem, finding her way to Saltmarsh, or what this land considered to be human civilization. With no real direction, and heading back the way she'd ran in case she'd bump into those Duergar again, she made an educated guess, looking to where she felt was north, and she held her breath, from gasping in surprise. On the other side of the dell, where the pine forest continued, she saw the silhouette of a man, sat upon the lower branches. He did not move, but she knew he knew she could see him, and that he could see her. Verily, he felt his curious eyes were on her. She was about to utter something when her wits held her tongue. She did not want to raise her voice in such an unsettlingly quiet place. Instead, she walked gingerly over the stream, limping to save herself pain from her ankle, and climbed or crawled until she reached the other end of the dell to see him. Indeed, as she climbed up, she saw the man, still in shadow in the trees. Thank the 12, Fiona thought. When she reached the top of the dell, she blinked and grew stupefied with surprise, as the man was naught but a wild tangle of branches and vines. And yet, she had sworn there was a man there, right there. Fiona did not know what to make of it. She deigned to step back and re-witness the cunning apparition, but it did not appear. Fiona was spooked, and her eyes watered at the supernatural phenomenon. Her frozen composure would have held her, seeking an escape from the situation, but she turned her attention to the sudden sound that came from beyond the opposite side of the dell, behind her. There was a great rumbling of breaking trees and swaying branches in the blackness beyond, to which she looked upon. In turn, she shrank herself backwards from the nearing sound, ever more into the woods, looking upon the noise's direction with mad focus, as though it were a burning ship at sea. She saw a small figure burst from the trees beyond, tripping and stumbling upright, carrying a lantern over its shoulder. One of the Duergar, Fiona realized. It moved with the fatigue of a scared doe, and though she was at a distance, she could tell the creature was heavily wounded and running for its life. Fiona decided to follow suit and began to turn to make her own flight, but not until she caught sight of the source of the Duergar's fright. A giant humanoid and bestial thing, its hunched form only seen for a sliver of a second, breaking from branches as its giant, clawed hands caught the fleeing Duergar by the head, swiftly snatching it back into the shadows with it, growling with elation, where the dwarf made a damned squealing scream that was only overridden by the predator's triumphant laugh, which, what Fiona swore to be, was a giant hybrid between man and boar. The image in her mind, though fleeting, drove her into a fear-fueled sprint that flew her ever deeper, as far away from the sudden horrifying scene as humanly possible. She had heard the beast thing's cloven feet dangerously close as she sped like a stag through the woods. What's more, she swore she had heard other sounds, the snarls of beastly creatures that must have been in league with the giant boar man. What cursed forest would have such ungodly-looking things? She thought to herself. At last, Fiona slowed and her mind was awash with woe for ever coming here. Her foolishness felt ever more present than her bravery. Her ankle did not feel a sore. Hungry, she walked and ate in silence. She felt stale. Her hair was a curly mess. Her tired gait was like that of a stroller priest. Flustered, dishevelled, and morose of heart, she walked onward through the forest, very lost and very nervous. The silence of the woods, as well as the close-knit layout of the trees, only added to it. Chapter 6. The days of self-reflection were past, for Fiona was definitely, completely lost in the forest. She had begun to feel damned, and that the forest was playing games with her. But more so, she was very hungry. Depleting her supplies days ago, the mind had made her eat leaves as she trod through, now content as some form of forest animal. Her long hair was now a wild tangle bundled behind her headband veil. Her skin was tarnished with earth from the odd fall of tripping over exposed roots or uneven ground. Her clothes were torn by the low, strong branches that forever seemed to close in around her as she continued on her aimless ramble. She had quested to find the coast and continue her walk northwest to Saltmarsh, but her early misadventures had discombobulated her. Even retracing her steps she found was always different. She prayed to God and the 12 for a sign or an omen, kissing her amulet and reciting parts of prayers. But when she looked up, not even the green arc could be seen. This felt like a state of limbo. More to that, the initial disbelief of the forest being so quiet and timid of life had grown into numb acceptance. She felt weak and brittle. It had been 3, 4, God knows however many days trudging through the Armorican pine forest, and she had run out of water a day ago, and now she was licking tree sap and tasting dried leaves to briefly calm her aching belly. Evening was closing in, and Fiona groaned with a wince. She was so hungry, and her thoughts were growing dark. Joyous embrace with Fingal were devolving into screaming bouts and slaps upon him. Whispers of her husband taken up with a Saltmarsh woman, or maybe off to explore the Isles to revel and whore, while she would waste away like a spinster, though surely inconceivable, were creeping in as possibilities. Fiona fed herself with premonitions, and how oddly violent she would mete out those crimes. She slowed her trudging steps upon a darkening grey day in this gloomy forest, and looked warily ahead as she heard the sound of something for the first time in the distance. Her dress was torn around the ankles, and her fur boots gave her step silence. Slowly and surely she crept with a wide berth from the source of the sound. A large, wild young boar, its rear in her direction as it faced away from her, eating away by a tree. Slowly and carefully, Fiona silently took out her bow and nocked an arrow. Hunting boars and deer, a reminder to a more civilized life back in Harperstein. Taking aim at its belly, she breathed and loosed. The arrow struck true, and the boar let out a wild, angry shriek. It spun around and around in pain, and didn't see the second arrow shoot its belly. The boar let out a run, and for a moment Fiona dreaded a chase, but it quickly reduced to a jog as it jumped about in circles before it fell to the forest floor. Not dead, just injured, bleeding out. Fiona hastily ran toward her game and with another arrow shot the dying creature in its belly before kneeling before it and opening its belly with her dagger. It squealed sharply as the dagger point drove through fur and flesh, and it writhed and twitched while life left it. That felt really good, she thought to herself. She'd always liked hunting back in her village, but this was something more. Her hunger and the imminent meal she'd have made her savor the memory of killing this beast with a somewhat perverse elation. It wasn't the prospect of food that made her happy. It had been the way her prey had reacted to her killing blow. She felt powerful and fulfilled as she knelt over it. Its life was hers to take, and she would absorb its life for her own sustenance. A dreadful pleasure rose from these aberrant ideas. But Fiona was content to have such foreign imagery linger as she prepared to cut her kill to eat. Fiona observed that the boar had more blood in it than she would have expected. The tusks and muzzle were drenched in it. Before she could investigate further, another sound startled her from behind, and she stifled a scream with her bloody hands. Tied to a tree several feet from her was a man, or the remnants of one, and more to that, he was alive. He was naked and tied to the tree. His feet were gone, devoured by the boar, and much of his body was missing parts from wild wandering creatures that had come to eat parts from him. His body was open, his eyes pecked out, his genitals partly ripped, and yet the man was still alive, gargling and gurgling gibberish and sobs. Upon the remains of his chest was a symbol carved into his flesh that had not been as much as pecked compared to the rest of him. A circular swirl. Oddly, that part of him had been left clean by the forest inhabitants. Fiona almost retched before the horrific sight, were it not for her empty belly denying her so. This was unparalleled cruelty. She shakily took up her bow and loosed an arrow upon the man's heart to give him peace. When she let it fly, he made a muffled gargle of agony, and he writhed in his bonds. But he did not die. Fiona's eyes watered with cosmic dread, and she obliged the immediate thought to fire again, this time on his skull. A shot to the temple. The man shook and moaned with pleading whines through a swollen, gummy mouth, rocking his head violently in the pain. Again, he did not die. Fiona looked at the man and felt an invasive idea slip by. Shoot him again. The thought was insidious, aberrant, and evil, and behind that there was an odd fascination about entertaining the idea. A perverted obsession with trying to kill a man who could not die. What's more was the pleasurable idea of hearing and watching him writhe about in a reverie of agony, while she herself would be in her own reverie of ecstasy. Her hand instinctively fondled the religious amulet by her neck, and she shook herself from the sadistic thought, focusing her attention to her new meal on the ground. But once again, Fiona felt a moment of unusual pride at the kill. Its bleeding carcass, its agonized face, it was like a tapestry of death. Oh, she felt good for some reason, and her stomach ached for its flesh. That night, Fiona ate well, She had been unable to get a fire going because the forest was suddenly hit with a savage torrent of rain and boomed aloud with thunder and lightning. This was good for her, as it happened, for she had been in need of filling her water skin. The rain came hard and fast, pounding the forest until every drop felt like a small slap against Fiona's head. But nevertheless she was able to refill her water skin and whispered a thankful prayer to the 12 and Creator for the gift. Oddly, the prayer of thanks did not roll as smoothly or earnestly as they otherwise would have. At this point it sounded more like a repetitive mantra than anything, a chore of words that were answered with silence. She had cut the boar into pieces with her dagger and eagerly ate its liver and heart, and had taken both of its hind legs in her bag, leaving the rest of the carcass by the dying or undying man. She had climbed atop a tree, resting atop a comfortable crotch of this particular pine, eating as she watched the dying man below. What had once been abject horror had manifested into sick, unholy curiosity. It was morbidly fascinating to see the man endure as animals from the shadows. Crows, foxes, rats, even a wolf came in the night to peck and shear him bit by bit. Creatures that had not shown themselves to the forest since she had been here now converged to this man to slough his flesh, carefully slicing a meal from him before moving away. They didn't even touch the dead boar, save for a passing sniff. Holy reprimands for her dark intrigue, for the deathly spectacle had eroded from her upon that rainy night. Why should I feel sorrow or guilt? She reasoned with herself. I did everything I could. I tried to end his pain and send him to the heavens. If he did not die, then it is not his time, surely. The longer she observed him, the more her mind began to see the dying man as a gift. He, after all, was the reason she had this raw boar food in her belly. Her jaw and lips were slick with blood as she ate and passively watched now as strange small humanoids materialized out from the darkness to flay piece by piece off of him. Creatures she recognized from tales or sightings back in her homeland. Headless men, goblins, elves and kobolds. She stilled herself with marvelous 2 centaurs clocked by, one man and the other a woman. They prodded and poked the man, causing the tied-up figure to jolt with a stifled cry. They did not eat him. Instead, they played with him, fondling his innards or fingering his socket as the man, unable to die, accepted their invasive sadistic intrusions with a torrent of gargling pleas of mercy lost in an abscess-swollen mouth. They, like some of the other creatures who came by to this dark site of evil, revelled in his suffering. Through the darkest hours of the stormy night, all manner of creatures, who would have otherwise butchered each other for territory or fun, now behaved like humans, congregating, savouring sweet treat samples on market day. What Fiona had at once thought were spasms of agony were surely gestures of offering. He wanted the forest to suck from his flesh. He willingly sacrificed his mortal shell so the things in the forest may survive another day. It was at least what she told herself as creature after creature, be it beast or monster, came by to give him a moment of agony. Fiona watched him until she fell asleep, and surprisingly, unlike the other days, it was a dreamless, gentle one. More days came by. They were dry and without the sight of a single creature. Fiona, on the other hand, felt herself blending in with the forest more and more. Her face was daubed in boar blood and grime. Her hair was a dark tangle of dirty blonde. Her clothes were torn to the point that her thighs were completely exposed. Weak materials that were not suited to this terrible adventure. Oh, she felt feral. Her eyes were dark, Her face was gaunt, a hollow thing, and her breathing was a rasp. She was questioning what the hell she was doing here. Oft did she have to remember why, and it was only the ever-diminishing idea of finding Fingal or Saltmarsh that restrained her from taking the daggers by her belt and slitting her own throat or gutting her belly open. Her mind was growing dark with evil ideas. She felt alone and wildly angry. She craved another boar to gut, to punish, to make squeal and squirm. Over time, Fiona had found the latter thought was a far more compelling reason to keep living than the idea of love. But those ideas ebbed away when, at last, at what she suspected to be midday, she found a fast-flowing stream of fresh water. She doggedly rushed to kneel before it, thanking the Creator, the 12, and the Saints for this gift. She had run out of water, and her rations had near depleted, save for one single boar's leg and some other chunks, which are rotting pretty surely, judging by the smell growing from her backpack. It had been days of wandering the forest, completely lost, and feeling herself going in circles, were it not for the slight change of ground, undulation, and vegetation. So on that grey day when she spotted a stream of water, she fell on all fours and began to cup the water with both hands and slurp greedily. The icy coolness and freshness of it felt like a gift from the heavens. When she had her fill, she placed her open water skin into the stream and let it be filled until it was swollen. This time, Fiona would now keep her trail by the stream, following it downwards, where she hoped she would find the coast. However, before Fiona stood back up from the stream, she caught sight of a reflection amid its ripples. She did not look well. She looked small, gaunt, and agreeably wild. Her cloak and clothes were tarnished and torn by travel. Her face, though clean from the water, revealed sleepless feral eyes. There was something abnormal about the way she looked. Every night she had had bad dreams or restless sleep. Her dreams were strange. They were her in the forest, but it was always night, and she was always running with youthful vitality. But she'd come to realize that she wasn't simply running, she was hunting. And in those dreams she felt frustration, hunger, and anger as she did now. When she would wake, she would feel hollow, dry, and exhausted. An hour or so later of following the left flank of the stream, she knelt with a sigh of relief as she came to the edge of a natural glade. She collapsed sideways in sudden exhaustion and drank greedily from her water skin. Finally, after days or however long of endless, aimless travel through a labyrinthine forest, the land was changing, and what's more, it was open. Noon's sun shone rays upon the glade, making the verdant spot look heavenly. Fiona simply drank in the sight, focusing on relaxing her exhausted breathing from the sheer excitement.
What's up with you, bonny lassie?
Fiona jerked up and grabbed her bow in a clumsy moment, gazing at the figure from whose voice had come. A skinny, pale woman with long, greasy black hair and teasing pale blue eyes. She was drab in patchwork furs and seemed unarmed. Fiona shakily nocked an arrow and backed further into the glade from the stranger.
Hoy, hoy!
Exclaimed the woman, holding her hands up.
What ye be doing making trouble when I mean naught but a blether?
A blether?
Fiona repeated quietly through trembling lips. She had no idea how to react other than to be dangerously cautious. Through a torrent of thought and ideas, she said with words that felt off after not speaking for so long.
Tell me where Saltmarsh is, stranger. I am lost.
The strange woman was silent and stared back at Fiona. The coy look flickered slightly.
Oh, aye. What affairs do ye have in Saltmarsh, lass? You're nae local from that place or any that I ken.
My husband is there.
Oh, a romantic.
She clasped her hands theatrically, making Fiona bridle and glower.
And a lucky man he must be.
She pointed her frail, delicate finger beyond the glade to the left of Fiona.
Follow this here stream. Yonder north does your man wait for you in Saltmarsh. 'Tis but less than a day's walk for a lassie like ye. Maybe just before night comes a creeping.
Thank you.
Said Fiona cautiously.
What's your name?
The woman did not answer, seemingly unsure. She hesitated.
Anne?
The way she said it made Fiona dubious. She was about to give a false name herself, but quickly realized what the point would be.
It's nice to meet you, Anne. My name is Fiona.
A sweet name for a bonny-faced woman, aye.
Her obscene skinniness bordered on the deathly skeletal. Hair long, thick and matted, but with eyes and animation that radiated uncanny life.
Enjoy Saltmarsh.
She said quietly, before turning to leave southbound across the glade. As the woman turned to leave, Fiona felt a pang of sorrow, looking at her walk away and looking so ghoulish in girth. She called back.
Wait!
Anne looked sharply back, with a hint of irritation hidden by forceful blinks. It was animal-like, and it startled Fiona for a moment.
What?
Are you hungry?
The woman wore a blank expression and did not answer.
I'm sorry, I've been so lost. You have been kind to me. I don't have coin. If baubles are what you prefer, I have food. If your journey is long, I'm happy to share my food with you.
The skinny woman, Anne, did not move, though her eyes glinted with something.
Yes. I.
She began hesitantly.
What have ye to spare?
Fiona unslung her backpack and opened the flap to show her a bundle that was wrapped around a boar's leg. The skinny woman walked guardedly toward Fiona, though her eyes glistened at the contents in Fiona's pack like it were treasure. It was heartbreaking and strange for Fiona, and was unsure how to respond. Crouched like a wolf about to pounce on the packs in Fiona's bag, she paused to look up at her with wide, hungry eyes, and spoke lowly.
What if I want all of it?
Fiona hesitated and thought. Saltmarsh was only a few hours' walk and had currently eaten and drank already. She would brave the walk, and besides, this young woman seemed like she hadn't eaten in days, maybe more. Surely it was the proper thing to do. By doing this, perhaps God and the 12 would reward her.
Have it,
she said kindly. The skinny woman rummaged her hands and hauled most of the meat chunks into her arms like cradling a baby. She smelled them and rolled her eyes with pleasure that bordered onto orgasm.
Thank you, kind woman. Oh, bless you.
She said, and got on her knees before Fiona, quickly grabbing on her hands with both of her own and pressed her palm against her lips, emphatically kissing with wet slobbers. Fiona froze, too shaken to do anything as the woman worshipped her hand until Fiona pulled away rather forcefully and bridled from her, making the woman fall on all fours, her thick, lanky black hair curtaining her gaunt, pale face. She looked up at Fiona with wide eyes that promised tears by the way they glistened, and her lips, red from the kisses, leaked saliva like she was a slavering dog.
I'm sorry. I'm so hungry.
As quickly as she said that, Anne wrapped her arms around Fiona's exposed thigh and began voraciously kissing and licking it. Fiona whined with terror as Anne hissed words of worship to an unknown deity to her, looking up at her with wide blue eyes that spoke of obscene gratitude. Something about this behaviour unnerved Fiona, something inhuman, It made her rise into a cry of disgust and fright and kick Anne off of her, causing the skinny, weak woman to collapse on all fours like a wounded animal. Anne looked back at her with a pained, tearful expression. She looked as though she was about to cry. But Fiona did not tarry. She spun around and darted into a run northward.
Don't go!
Called the woman as she moaned a wail of sorrow. But Fiona's ears were already being drowned out by the sound of her running and the forest as she drove ever onward.
Please don't go. Come back.
Were the last sounds she heard that came from a voice that cracked like a sorrowful teenager. But nay, Fiona sped on, eager for Saltmarsh, eager for the nightmare to be over. Chapter 7. Night was beginning to fall on Armorica with a dying light akin to the very day's dawn. At first, she had been eager, with her mind awash with fantasies of what Saltmarsh would be like. It was a village, but was it one like Harpestein, a motley gaggle of thatch and board stone huts, or a flourishing walled port with watchtowers, fleets of keelboats anchored by a bustling quayside? The latter Fiona had discarded, for Armorica had a dismal reputation for being wretchedly poor when it came to civilization. Which begged the question whether why anyone would live or stay here. At least on the mainland, there was security and some semblance of order, even with the rebellion raging on. Speaking of, what if Saltmarsh was a rebel hideout? What if the Harpestein sailors, Fingal, and the soldiers were captives, or dead? The dark idea was shaken from Fiona's mind, and she concentrated on her surroundings. The winds had stagnated to the point that the forest was eerily quiet. Her steps upon bramble and twigs sounded like thunder breaking the silence. She could focus upon her own breathing, her heartbeat, but to her right she could hear a new sound. Waves? Waves! The mere idea of it was enough to elate her mood and walk on with renewed vigor. After a few minutes of traversing the treacherously uneven terrain, she finally saw the trees part to give way to an eternal grey expanse of sea and fog-ridden skies, ever darkening as night crept on. The cold air kissed her with an icy embrace, and she felt a smile creep upon her face. She felt free. She laughed aloud, a sound of hope and relief intertwined with tears, like a prisoner feeling the air of freedom after languishing in a deep, dark dungeon. She knelt before the coast as the tide gently caressed her ankles before wafting back. She preyed upon that coast, feeling the moment of freedom, soaking it all in before standing up and remembering her initial plan back when she first arrived to this forlorn island. Follow the coast northward. Looking about, as dim as it was, she eventually discovered the remnants of an old footpath, a thin lane of dirt bordered by malignantly growing wild vegetation. Despite the creeping crawl of night looming upon the land, Fiona felt no fear or trepidation, and daintily began what she hoped to be her last march to safety. Something was terribly wrong with Saltmarsh. Just minutes prior to seeing the first signs of human habitation, she had seen peculiarly arranged sticks hanging from strings tied to the branches of coastal trees above the small footpath she trod. The sticks were arranged in odd geometric formations that Fiona knew not to which religion or superstition it belonged to. The recent surge of paganism in her homeland had seen such effigies appear, called wiccas, but she had never paid any heed to such silly superstition. More to that, as she reached the village, she was unnerved by the silence of the settlement and the emptiness of the small roads and footpaths that gradually converged towards the small gaggle of shoddy stone and thatch houses by a ramshackle harbour, empty and dead. Even the coastal waves were quieter here, as though they were timid from the village. The quiet fear crept so hard on her that her hair stood on end, her eyes watered briefly. She looked over her shoulder at the forest and found herself surprised at how dark it was, the suffocating trees tightly battling each other, causing not much beyond a few feet to be swallowed by an abyssal darkness. Had I been travelling through there for so long? She thought incredulously. She was either very mad or very brave. Probably both, she suspected. It was as though she were looking at the forest for the first time. She aptly turned her head away and spurred herself onward, spooked by the threatening presence it silently bared. She stepped towards the village properly and looked around cautiously, gripping the dagger by her belt with reassurance. The village itself was underwhelming. Little more than a dozen huts parted by unkempt coastal vegetation and roads of mud before the ramshackle harbour where sat a gaggle of fishing boats, keelboats, and, what caught Fiona's attention, a sailing ship. The same ship that Fingal, the sailors, and the soldiers had sallied upon. It too floated by the edge of the harbour, its anchor firmly holding in its place. Except for the sound of the sea, the village was quiet. So quiet. Returning to the village, she went on her next quest for finding food, for hunger assailed her. By the harbour there were unopened barrels of fish encased with salt and brine, as well as a basket of eggs from which Fiona broke raw and slurped greedily from. Honeycomb from the mainland and vegetables were scoffed, until Fiona, not used to eating so much so quickly in such a short time, suddenly threw up, causing her to store extra food in her backpack instead of her stomach. As her belly stopped groaning and her mind awoke, she began to become more aware of the village itself. Until now, she had not noticed that all the doors of the village were unlocked, and that they all bore the same symbol painted upon them, a swirling circle, the same circle that the undead man had carved upon his chest. Remembering that terrible moment felt unreal, like a memory concocted by the words of a dark bard's tale, not her own. The sight of these symbols gave her pause, reminding her that she was still in Armorica. She was still unsafe. The villagers' homes had been abandoned. The streets, however, had not. Across the mud were hooves and paws and claws, bigger than the animals they belonged to. There were human steps, barefoot, recent. She was dismayed by the lack of Greenwichian symbolism anywhere in the village, not even a charm or an amulet. The only form of reverence they had was this swirling circle painted on the doors. Fingal had always said the people of Armorica were strange. Over time, she discovered that the footsteps were not the random meandering wanders of scavengers, but an organized movement. They converged to the far end of the village by a bank of rocks and earth where above the forest into the rest of Armorica began. A set of strange structures stood erect before the bank. Long, large shards of stone from which strange writing and obscene murals had been etched, and around their base lay rotten food and bones. Above each stone was the swirling circle. What paled before her was what made her stagger back, for at the center was a sacrificial bonfire built not by wood, but the bones of humans and beasts, upon which a sapling had been burned along with the charred, shattered remains of something that had been humanoid. Its bone structure was alien, its form large. Chains had been used to restrain it, as it had presumably died in agony from the fires, judging by its contorted skull. And across this ritual site was a human-sized statue of wood, hewn in the form of an egg, but with murals etched across it, and carved outwardly facing Fiona was a screaming face from which tears of dark trickled from its eyes and mouth. A sudden rustling of leaves broke through the spellbinding silence, sharp, close, and followed by the rising patter of approaching footsteps. The sound tore Fiona from the frozen terror that had held her to look upon the alien image she could neither explain nor believe. The movement grew louder. Then, unexpectedly, it was joined by singing. A lilting melody, bright and untroubled, drifting through the chilly night air. It was a cheerful ditty, sung in a high-pitched chorus that could only have belonged to children, or perhaps very young women. The sound floated from somewhere to her far left within the forest, carried by the wind. The innocent song seemed almost absurd against the backdrop of that profaned ritual site. She drew back from the ritual clearing, her movements quick and silent, slipping through the wild roads until she found a nearby cottage. Its door hung half open, unlatched. She slipped inside, thankful to the 12 for the ease of her sharp escape. The singing grew louder, closer, and Fiona's curiosity compelled her toward a narrow window on the opposite wall of the cottage, whereby a shuttered window was. She pressed her face to the shutter and eased it open enough just to see. What emerged from the tree line was both eerie and mesmerizing. The figures were small, perhaps a head taller than gnomes, yet lithe and graceful. Unlike the squat, grim dwergar she'd encountered, these creatures possessed sharp, slender beauty, graceful faces, small noses, delicate chins, ears tapering to elegant points. Their skin was a mottled mix of dark grey and sickly khaki. Their eyes glimmered black, each with a slitted yellow pupil that caught the cloud-hidden moonlight. They were entirely hairless, their limbs lean and sinewy, hands ending in long, claw-like fingers. Fiona recognized them at once, though she had only ever seen their corpses before. Elves.
"Hello,"
came a voice behind her. It was feminine, or nearly so. A guttural rasping through cracked lips and a smile of long, jagged teeth that grinned with no mirth. Fiona spun, her stomach lurching. An elf stood barely a few feet away in the dark of the cottage. It had been here inside well before Fiona came here. Its androgynous features made it impossible to tell its sex. Its swampy, glistening skin sheened like oil in the gloom. It wore a man's tunic, too large for it, tattered and stiff with dried blood. Around its waist dangled something that made Fiona's breath catch. A rotting human's head. Its eyes were gone, the skin carved with shallow, deliberate dagger marks, symbols Fiona did not understand. Her mouth went dry, and she stared at the abject agony still left on the decapitated man's face. The elf smiled wide and delighted, and stroked the head with a lover's tenderness.
You like?
It crooned, voice distorting into a mockery of affection. Before she had a moment to react with her dagger, they were everywhere at once, clawed hands seizing her arms, her shoulders, her legs. The elves swarmed her like carrion birds. She was dragged out into the open while they jabbered and jeered, grinning to her and each other with cruel glee. Boots torn from her feet, their voices were strange, a language of twisted, malformed beauty. Words sung with a cadence of poetry, yet broken by croaks and guttural trills, as though corruption had tainted even their speech. At the ritual site, they drew her down, forcefully spreading her limbs across the dirt. They laughed and danced around her with elated fervor, eyes alight with wicked glee. One of them, tall for its kind, adorned with woven reeds and bones, crouched astride her and tugged at her tunic, tearing the fabric without care. Fiona thrashed and screamed, but their strength was unnatural. For all their frail appearance, their grip was iron. Then the leader froze. Its black-eyed gaze fell upon the small, gleaming pendant that hung against Fiona's chest. Then all their malignantly yellow pupils widened with amazement. The Grunician amulet. A murmur rippled through the gathered elves. Their eyes widened, their mirth died. One hissed, another shrieked something that might have been a curse. Within moments, the chorus of their croaking voices rose into a discordant uproar of disgust and alarm. Fiona felt their grasp falter. Seizing the instant, she summoned what power she could, a bolt of energy that surged through her body and burst outward. For a heartbeat, she was free. But the elves were faster. Their shock turned to fury. The leader barked an order. Another elf, this one wielding half a broken oar like a club, stepped forward and swung. The blow caught her on the temple. The world shuddered, spun, then folded into darkness. Dark, dark, dark as his waking thought and dreams of an endless forest of flesh to devour, torture, and despoil. Home was so dark, and reeking with pulsing meat he could never rend or devour. They were like him, and as loath as he was to let them keep beating, he knew Master would not approve. He lumbered around a den of filth and bone among his herd. None were as strong as he, well, save one, but that one was not as smart. The cavern offered no illumination, no release from his roiling lust to hunt, destroy, and feed. Surely Master would let him out again soon. Could Master not feel his frustration, the frustration of the pack? With cloven feet he meandered through the den, with a score of others like him dwelt. Hunched, animal-headed humans like he. All of us are restless, he thought. For all that filled his mind was murder and chaos. They wanted to roam free again, to hunt, to hurt, to eat and sleep before doing it all again and again, until Master would call them back. From the shadows of a nest of rotting flesh, a cat-headed one stared at him. He knew that look. He'd seen it before in his own reflection, once, upon the surface of a stream. Simmering violence. He wasn't surprised. That one is weak, he thought. I take his food, his rest. I take his mates for my own. It pleases me and it pleases Master. Now he sees me frustrated and he thinks me distracted. Weak. Their eyes locked. The cat thing lunged, unable to restrain its hunger for violence. It had been a long time coming, and he was grateful that the cat man chose this moment of discontent to strike. Foolish runt, he thought. He was twice its size, stronger by far, but the cat thing was fast, small, black-furred, and battle-scarred from many hunts through Master's forest. The others watched suddenly with gleeful attention. He, however, was in no mood for games in this cramped, stinking den, least of all with such pitiful competition. The cat thing leapt. He anticipated it. He'd seen that move from him many times before. He kicked with his hoof mid-air. A sharp crack filled the den, and he almost groaned with pleasure at the hoarse hiss of pain that escaped his foe. The herd jeered, but he had no desire for glory. Only rage, only hunger, and now bloodshed. The Catman writhed on the ground, nursing his shattered ribs. Disgust curled his lips. He stalked closer as it crawled away, dragging itself across the rock. Where do you think you're going? He squatted over the wounded creature, one massive hand pressing down on its back, the other gripping its neck. The Catman gurgled in shock as he pulled, slowly, deliberately, pleasingly slow. The creature squirmed, claws raking the dirt as the herd circled close, growling and licking their snouts in anticipation. Even the Catman's former mates, those that were left, and those he had taken for his own, hissed and shrieked with cruel delight. It was not a quick death. He tore the head loose in fits and starts, savoring the agony until slivers of boredom overtook him. Then, with one final wrench, he ripped it free and raised it high. The herd roared with glee and fell upon the twitching body, snapping limbs, slurping blood, tearing flesh as though they'd been starved for an age. Master would not be displeased with this kill in his sacred darkness. Master saw all. Master knew all. Master would not punish him. He hoped. He left with his prize. The severed, torn feline head, its face frozen in agony. It still twitched as blood dripped down his arm. It still remarkably ebbed with fading life. A dark idea crept in his mind. He placed it beneath his crotch, before bending slightly and wiping his buttocks with the twitching head, laughing with loud, cruel bellows until it stopped twitching. Then hatred surged through him to crescendo into a chorus of pleasure. With a satisfied snarl, he stomped on it again and again, until it was pulp. One of his mates, a skinny, rat-headed thing, sniffed and licked at the remains on the floor, greedy and unashamed. He lifted his hoof above its uncaring head. He really wanted to stomp on her head. His blood was up and he craved bloodshed. But he couldn't, if Master found out. He lifted his hoof away from the snivelling mate who slurped and licked the mushy remains of the head, and he let out an irritated snort. His blood was up, his hunger roused. He needed more. Then, shouting from above and beyond, from the forest, his ears twitched. Perhaps Master had heard his cravings. Pushing and punching through the herd, he lumbered to the top of the slope where the rest of Master's minions dwelt. He was sure he'd known their names once. Now they were only meat for Master. Meat he was forbidden to touch. Oh, it ached to look at them. Just sacks of flesh to eat, blood to drink. When would he be allowed to hunt again? He snorted through his snout, the sound echoing in irritation. Other things not like him, lurked in the shadows, its crevices dangling cages or open nests. The hall was vast and lightless, filled with Master's creations. Small, pointy-eared creatures who made their food scream long and loud before savouring it. Short, hairy ones who dragged prey from above for all to play with. Headless things with faces in their chest, babbling endlessly. Man-headed horses, winged women, scaled birds. All of them agents of chaos in Master's name. Master made them, Master led them, Master fed them. The last part was all he cared about. He was so hungry, always. Even his dreams mocked him, dreams of running through the world above, chasing litters of screaming prey without breaking a sweat, only to wake gnawing his own arm. Sometimes, rarely, he dreamed of something else, something deep within him laughing at him, cruel and mocking, and he was doing something, somewhere strange and alien, a world of... The noise shattered his thoughts. The small pointy-eared things scurried into the hall, gibbering and dancing excitedly. Between them, dragged like trophies, came two larger figures. Humans. One was a man, his clothes so torn he was nearly naked, his skin raw with cuts and welts. He wept as they poked him with crude spears, occasionally whipping his bare flesh to make him stumble and dance. The other, he realized, was a woman, carried limply but almost with reverence. The little creatures handled her with uncharacteristic care. He found it strange. They feared only Master. The elves brought their captives to the only lit place in the hall, the entrance to Master's chamber. Neither he nor any of the herd were permitted near it. He knew why. Master had made them, molded them, and he hated them. They were born simply to hunt and obey him. The two humans were dragged into the glowing chamber. The herd growled in frustration. He flinched, as did all when the scream came. It was a familiar sound, a scream of joy from Master. Master emerged, and the little creatures rushed in to haul the two back out. The man still lived, struggling weakly. Master spoke without words. His decrees pressed directly into their minds. The man was thrown to the floor before the salivating mob of minions. Food, came the vision. Sloughing flesh, marrow sucked from bone, blood spraying from torn arteries. The herd around him salivated, aroused and frenzied at the promise of fresh meat after chewing only bones and scraps for so long. Then the woman. She was placed on a stone altar, and the vision came excitedly from Master. The word came, boon. She would become one of them. All who bore the mark of Master's enemy were boons. With the visionary word, he, like all who belonged to Master, knew that boons were Master's greatest delight, the corruption of the interfering gods who now lay claim to the world that was once theirs. Such boons like this woman thing would be a gleeful insult to the new god's face, as Master remakes them into a shape of his choosing, a beast thing like him. Her skin carved with Master's mark before she would be sunk into the black ichor from which all beasts were born. He did not know how Master chose. None did. Master was omniscient, glorious, wise and terrible. He knew his place before the Master, and soon this woman thing would too. The herd, elated at the coming of another potential hunter, growled and jeered at the still woman. He did not. Why? Something rose in his throat, a bile. Not just that. Since he'd first seen her, something stirred in him that he hadn't felt since... Since when? It wasn't lust, not exactly, though his heart quickened. It wasn't just his heart. His mind burned. The clothes, her hair, the silver clasp that bound her cloak, it all struck something within him. Master began the ritual, commanding his servants to bring the tools. The carving dagger, the plants he burned with a flick of his fingers, and the basin of blackness from which all beasts were born. The Master leaned close to the woman's face. His fists curled. He blinked, as though struck by thought. Then he saw that she began to stir. Dreaming, he could see it. The same nightmare all of them had before, awakening in the dark that greeted them after sleep. A dream of endless depths, of existence unmade. A poison. A poison? He suddenly thought to himself. Where did such an idea come from? No, something was happening to him. An uncertainty, a divergence from his primal directions decreed by his master. And with that uncertainty came feelings. No, memories. When the elves returned with the tools, the pleased master gestured for them to begin. The elflings were elated with lascivious joy. One of the elves, drab and dirty human clothes too big for it, undressed eagerly, leapt upon the altar and knelt over the woman, its face mad with simmering heat. The other 2 elves lifted the remnant of her skirt up to expose her nakedness, as the elf on the altar, with master's blessing, began to rub himself erect. The final act before corruption. Like all beast things that he'd seen master make, the last part of the old self would be stripped away with a ritual of fornication. But not him, he thought. He was always what he was. He was, wasn't he? A self-reflection seeped through his thoughts like an invasive cancer, and with those thoughts came memories. Of light, of free will, of something else. Too scared to interrupt master in his moment of the ritual, he instead left the battle in his brain go on. The herd around him roared in excitement, the minions danced with cruel delight, the elves, sordid and trembling, touched her with vile curiosity while she stirred in her drugged stupor from master's whispering. Other creatures, small and large, came to light the plants that master had requested. He knew not why all this was needed. Indeed, he cared not, for the sight of the woman, and more to it, the sight of her impending defilement, was a captivated door to a world he never knew existed in all his eternity in this dark, dank, bloody pit of lust and hate. At this point, the herd had tore into the screaming man whom master had decreed as food. His legs gone, then his arms, then his belly. The hall echoed with the music of feeding and madness. But all that, in this moment, ceased to matter. Looking upon her now, something within him snapped. He roared a sound that shook the cavern, but was deafened by the cacophony of other creatures around the large hall. His saliva flying, voice cracking to silence. With a strength born from something deeper than rage, something that pierced the fog of master's control, he charged. Through an eternity of blissful darkness did Fiona slumber. Never did the question of whether she was alive or dead pass her consciousness, only that she was in a state of continual harmony. She only registered this, however, when a certain lucidity to her status suddenly grew. From the nothingness of nothing came forth a familiar place. A black, starless sky above an endless dark ocean which reflected the light of a sun that was not there. And the terrifying presence beneath the sable veil above. She felt it. Someone? Something? It or they watched her, and suddenly she felt naked and ashamed before its invisible gaze that seemed to scry her very existence. She was further haunted by the first question that came to her. Is this God? Is this the gate to the next world? With courage that did not come easy, Fiona looked up. It felt as though she warred against an army, pulling her gaze back down to the ocean, and she could feel the weight of her exertion. But she did. She looked up and faced the veil, faced God. She heard a voice. It did not echo amid the abyssal expanse. It was loud, and yet soft and gentle, and ancient. It did not speak with words, but with memories and thoughts. Swirling sounds like an ocean assailed her existence, and she felt a pouring wind rush past her. She gazed upon the eyes of another, of whom she knew not, but she gazed willingly at a brightness like a newborn seeing the world. A vast, vast blue sky, not of her home. This sky was a pale shade of endless, cloudless blue. No land, just an ocean with no ripple or wave, and to the distance, standing upon the water, was a man, silhouetted by the distance. No, not a man, Fiona realized. The performance of a man. It was a colossus, a living effigy that stood erect upon the water. It looked at something above with hatred. Fiona looked up and found her vision instantly snap back to the focus of this colossal man. An action she made born of instant crippling fear. Something terrifying was above her. Something that made a cacophony of strange noises and indecipherable gargling too alien for her own existence to dare to look at. The colossal naked giant, whose form was shadowed, and whose strange head touched the very sky, looked away from above her to whatever malignant presence bound Fiona and turned two red slits for eyes on her. The divinity of the alien thing was apparent, and she felt her soul wither from its gaze, before a noise from all around her assailed her feelings and pushed her into the water of this strange world, drowning in it as the sound of laughter and garbled voices ruptured all thoughts for calm. Down, down, down she plunged, forced into the depths of a warm ocean before the gradual pool of death came to carry her back into the eternal void of nothing. From dreams of herself submerged in the cosmic depths of a dark alien ocean, did she suddenly awake to find herself in the very same condition? Fiona was drowning, she was sure of it, but she was splashing, and she struggled to breathe now and then. And by the 12, she was freezingly cold. Her clothes were torn to shreds, but still worn. She looked around at a dawn daylight, cloaked by dark, almost black clouds, heavy rain and a storm of thunder across the sea. The tides were up and splashing roughly. There were things around her, wood, houses, boats, salt marsh. Salt marsh! She was flailing in the churning coastal waters. Grasping the edge of the boardwalk, she hauled herself out of the sea. Ahead lay a cluster of boats, some with oars, others with sails. Just then she heard heavy movement behind her, somewhere in the village. Still groggy from her vivid dreams, she turned, terrified of what she might see. Forsooth, she screamed, a wailing cry of one who knows they are about to die, clutching at her exposed legs in shame, for fear she may wet herself. 10 feet away stood a giant, hooved creature, part beast, part man. Its head and lower body were like that of a boar, eyes burning crimson with rage. Scars laced its flesh where patches of fur had been torn away. The rest of it was humanoid, yet twisted, massive, hunched and spattered with filth and blood. The boar man crouched on all fours, knuckles pressed to the earth as though it was ready to charge. Fiona shut her eyes. It was too late. The elves would have killed her, but they weren't here anymore. They must have fallen to this abomination while trying to flee. It didn't matter, elves or monster. She was dead. Just let him kill me, she thought. I go to God anyway. But the creature didn't pounce. Instead, it lumbered toward her with surprising speed. Fiona whimpered, eyes squeezed shut, and the stench of blood and sweat filled her senses. It gurgled. It roared, and she opened her eyes in fright at the sound of its voice. Fona? Fiona couldn't believe this aberration could speak, let alone say, Fiona! It bellowed again, its snout inches from her face. It meekly pointed with a giant finger at the brooch that held her tattered cloak together. The brooch that... She froze. The creature bowed its head, stifling growls as saliva dripped from its tusked jaws.
Fingal?
Fiona shakily whispered. She could hardly believe the name left her lips. The creature groaned, a sound that was deep beneath the bestial noise, unmistakably human and pained.
Fingal?
She said again, louder.
Fona! Fona!
He pointed with his massive claws towards the empty boats that were tied along the bay behind her. She felt feverish, like none of this was happening. Despite his hulking, apish appearance, the sadness and somewhat familiarity of his once human gentleness swayed Fiona into a fool's hope.
Fingal! Come with me, my love. Come with me. I came to find you. Let's go.
In a surge of reckless, if not ludicrously foolish courage, she placed her palms on either side of his snout. He growled, the sound pained and trembling.
We'll find a cleric, or a healer, or a druid, anyone. Just come with me, Fingal. I came here to save you. Please, please.
Her last words were but soft pleading whispers through wet, teary lips. The growling softened to a guttural thrum. He nudged his head against her, an awkward, clumsy bump, but gentle. In his malformed state, he had tried to kiss her in turn. Fiona kissed his snout and lips, and for a moment his trembling form grew still, his monstrous strength melting to a relaxed state beneath her human touch.
No heal, Fona. Monster downed.
He pointed to himself with an anguished look.
Monster.
Fiona's face crumpled as she broke into sobs. Fingal, on his knees, bowed his head in shame. He answered through a drooling growl, the words lost in the struggle to remain human.
Go.
Fiona didn't move. He bellowed, muscles bulging as the rage began to return.
Go now.
He shoved her away.
Go.
He roared again, his voice cracking, thrashing about the bay on the spot as the beast took hold once more. Rage consumed him. The man was gone. The monster had returned. The land had grown heavily foggy as well as stormy, obscuring much of her surroundings into hazy blurs. A rising noise came from the forest beyond Saltmarsh, the sound of monstrous, furious cries. Fiona realized then, Fingal had saved her from the elves. Speeding with tears of anguish and terror, obeying her husband's plea, she practically flew into the furthest rowboat she could find, looking to see if Fingal was there. But alas, the boar man was now bloodthirsty, and roaring hatefully at her, throwing barrels at her with clumsy precision. A horrific croaking scream shook the village and nearly made her freeze, had it not been for the rush of her blood, screaming for her to just keep going. The horrific screaming came again, thankfully slightly more distant, as Fiona rode speedily from the village, and the voices of things grew into a chorus of angry, aching growls. Fingal spun around at the noise, hopping to and fro as though he itched all over, roaring and wailing with bestial rage, frothing from his tusked mouth. He was facing the sound of the oncoming beasts and nightmares. Fiona was now 30 or so feet from the village when she saw it suddenly populate with things she did not know how to describe, other than that they were amalgamations between beasts and man. Dog-headed, horse-headed, rat-headed. They were grotesquely malformed mockeries of man, just as Fingal was. Other things, small things with spidery speed, sprinted to the edge of the harbour. Elves, kobolds, goblins, centaurs, blemmy, black dogs, and trow. More shapes still that were half concealed by the fog. Fiona screamed her husband's name as he went on all fours and pounced upon the first line of the monster mob like a siege engine upon a portcullis. A sudden torrent of screams and roars broke from their angry shouts as Fingal, a considerably large and tough beast man, compared to the most of them, savaged the elves, gored the goblins, gores and slams, stomping on them with his hooves or crushing them with his tusks and fists. Fiona rode on with quick breaths as she saw her love, even in his broken, cursed state, fight for her escape. He was a whirlwind of raw violence made manifest. Before the fog began to cloak the gory battle by the bays of Saltmarsh, Fiona witnessed what might have been Fingal's match. Another beast-man, twice his size, and with the head of a moose. She saw it break a part of the anchored sailing ship by the bay, and batter Fingal repeatedly over the head. Fingal had ignored them at first, but after the 6th or 7th, he knelt, and the creatures of Armorica fell upon him with bites, stabs, and bludgeons. He was surrounded, lost to their violent revelry, before a mass of them seemed to ignore Fingal and speed along the boardwalks over to the sea. All of them looked at Fiona. The eyes, they wanted to kill her, as they all made obscene gestures of sadistic cruelty, snapping timbers to pieces, stomping apishly along the harbour, or screamed with visceral anger at her, urging her to return. It was as though she belonged to them like some prize, and the sight of her rowing away to sea drove them mad with frothing fury. Fiona's eyes welled with tears of abject fear, for above the crowd of these hybrid monsters flew forth a masked, slender man, hooded and draped in deep red robes. He floated toward Fiona. Slowly but surely, he bore a mask depicting the same face of mad agony as the egg-shaped statue. Fiona rowed faster, and by God's grace the tide of the sea was on her side. But still the sorcerer levitated ever more across the sea, and began to speak with a voice that cut through the torrent of rain and rumbling thunder. It was a language Fiona did not understand, but one that caused her bones to chill with a shiver as though she were about to get a flu. Fright consumed her at the mad spectacle, and she stopped rowing. Drenched in rain, it hid her sobbing at the hopelessness of this nightmare. How could she escape such strange arcane power? She clutched her amulet as the boat rocked through the waves while lightning snapped about and thunder roared. With trembling lips she wailed quick prayers to God, broken every now and then by sobs of dread. The sorcerer floated ever calmly toward her, speaking in that terrible speech that split the air like a knife. Fiona curled up, knees high, and rocked herself in fear as the voice grew ever more present within her. She buried her head by her knees and wept. The words, the spells of the sorcerer were slowly seeping into invasive thoughts in her mind. Oh, dark thoughts. The hymns and chants of Greenwichian piety eroded feverishly from her mind to be replaced by an initial darkness that gave way to violent, debauched ideas. Primal figments so brutal and bloody that she stopped rocking with fear and instead growled an angry screech of maddening rage. The voice echoed more and more ideas that made her blood grow hot with the pleasure of sadistic cruelty. Of choking the Dwerga by the coast, watching the life fade from their eyes, snapping Anne's neck when she was upon her thigh, violently ravish and molest the elf who caught her by the door, gutting Fingal the way she gutted the boar, again and again and again, watching him squirm under her lacerations. Rage consumed her mind so much that at last she lifted her head from her knees and screamed with fury, grabbed the oars. Yes, go back. She wanted to go back. Back to Armorica. Free from inhibition. Back to madness. A sudden flash of static light made her blink from the mindless carnage her soul felt, and as though waking from a dream, she looked up, startled at the sorcerer, who was no longer speaking his enchantments. A bolt of lightning had just struck the sorcerer, making him shudder violently. He looked up to the clouds above and let out an inhuman scream that pierced through the chorus of the storm. He was replied with a savage boom of thunder that doused all other sound. The sorcerer stopped, somewhat stupefied, remaining on its point of levitation above the sea as Fiona stared on, breathing heavily and wiping hair from her face. What the hell's just happened? She thought incredulously. He slowly pointed a pale, gnarly finger at her. He did not say anything, nor did he move. He simply stayed levitating and pointing at her as both oars and tide washed her further and further away from the village of Saltmarsh, until the fog of the sea veiled the arcane apparition out from existence. She rowed ever backward, trying to understand what just happened. In a terrible moment, she had felt herself being lost to... Lost to what? Evil came the first word in her mind. She blinked as the fog was all she could see now, lost in a limbo of a violent sea that swept her in an easterly direction. Unable to fathom what monstrous nightmare she had just survived, from beginning the journey to the terrible dreams and compelling dark acts to finding Fingal, she broke into a whimpering sob and whispered thanks to the heavens, God and the 12, and Fingal. It took her some time before her face was no longer creased in anguish, and was instead a numb, absent candor. The seas were pulling her further and further away from the cursed land. After letting all the pain out with her tears, she slowly, gently shut her eyes, calming herself and slowly gripped the oars. Fiona rowed homeward, as far as she could from Armorica and its dreams.